Introduce our speaker for this evening. Alex comes to us from Getting Sober Young in Margate, New Jersey. Please give him a hand.
You guys really set the ambiance. My name's Alex. I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here today. The only reason I'm here is because a few good men gave me their time and hope. Sobriety date June 30th of 2011. I have a home group, Getting Sober Young, as you heard. And I have a sponsor. I don't do that sponsor thing because no one really... The purposes of being here at these types of meetings is to meet on the level, right? I've had people stand, up at meetings like this and give a long service resume, and meetings of this sort, speaker meetings, I've always understood is about one alcoholic connecting with another and identifying with stories. So my 2-page AA service resume doesn't really matter because it doesn't enable me to be more like anybody else. You know what I mean? I'm very careful in the rooms of AA not to do anything that's going to really differentiate us. Because I stand here in a suit, I'm going to end up taking this off. I'm going to be, I'm used to standing behind a podium. And this little music stand is kind of going to make me feel like I'm like a bear hiding behind a little bamboo shoot. So eventually I'm going to end up moving, right? So before I get on with it, I want to thank Ricky for asking me to come out to speak this evening. And I've spoken in rooms, from 5 people to almost 1,300 people. And I've spoken in front of crowds probably about 2,300. There's no difference for me whether there's 5 people or there's 2,300 because, as I said, we all meet on a level, right? Like, it's the job of the speaker to identify. Because I stand here in a suit right now, right? Like, you dress up, for things like this, and you dress properly to speak. But when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I showed up in a pair of torn sleeping pants and a wife beater. I was detoxing, glass was coming out of my face. My leg was an open wound from a car accident I just experienced. It was actively bleeding, and that's how I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't walk in a suit. I didn't arrive in a chair, right? So, it's funny when you go to meetings like this sometimes, and, I wear a suit every day for work. But I like to remember how I came in here, right? Like, that's the thing I don't want to forget. That's the thing, that anytime you're sitting in a room of AA, and I've gone through the process, I got time, and I started feeling like I was better than, I knew the steps, I was actively involved in service, and I somehow, evolved to a new level of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm thankful I stayed sober long enough to learn the true humility, to understand that despite what I wear and despite what the service resume says, I'm not drinking for one day, and that's how I was raised, in AA. So I never know how I'm going to, kind of do this, right? The last time I was at a recorded speaker meeting, I left a lot of tangents and a lot of open holes in my story, and then you lament about it for a few months afterwards. You get super self-conscious because I want to be the greatest speaker ever in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous and wow you guys for the years to come, and you say, wow, that was the most inspirational story I've ever heard. And then you're telling, your sponsees about this magical Alex speaker that you heard once. Because, right, all our defects don't go away. And that's something that took me a while to learn Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to spend less of tonight than usual speaking about my drinking history, more talking about the things that I've experienced sober that were uncomfortable and don't want to talk about, right? Because that's the thing in AA I don't think we spend enough time talking about openly. So I do want to get to that. And so I was raised, and I'm going to try to do a brief overview, and I always get stuck. I was raised in Alcoholics Anonymous in a group called the Stagecoach Group. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it's like in an abandoned building, like you would remember, like remember the Alamo moment was. Like it's this old concrete building where they still smoke inside. And when I got sober, the floors weren't painted, and there was ivy growing up the walls, and people would chain smoke. When I first got sober, I was probably smoking about a half to a pack of cigarettes per meeting, and there were 5 meetings a day. You know what I mean? I was just hiding out in this room, and I couldn't do anything else, and I was detoxing. I was sitting in this room, and the group was heavily focused on your drinking history, right? And that's what was shared about most of the time. So unfortunately, I spent the first years of my recovery speaking for 45 minutes about my drinking history and then freaking out and cramming in 5 minutes of recovery, right? So I'm going to try not to do that, but if you're watching me and I begin to look like I'm panicking, it's not because of anything you guys are doing. It's because I get stuck talking about my drinking history too long. Because I drank for 3 years. and I've been sober for over 8 years. So I spend more time talking about the 3 years that you guys all know about already, and not the 8 years that, frankly, saved my life over and over and over again. So I picked up the first drink somewhere between the ages of 16 and 17 years old. Not exactly sure, but I like to soften my story by saying I was raised in an alcoholic household, and I experienced the things that children of alcoholics experience. Everything under the sun. At the age of 12, my father had gotten sober, and I got into a fellowship that they called Alateen, which was cool, right? And I got involved in Alateen, and I'm an A-type personality. Before drinking, and sober. So I memorized 12 steps, and I was like, real into the Alateen thing, right? And eventually I got older, and I had some experience with Al-Anon, and obviously I wanted to qualify for the Triple Crown of Alcoholics Anonymous, so I went out to do my own research, right? But the reason I say that at the beginning of my story is because in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about self-knowledge availed us nothing, right? So I spent years of my life in Al-Anon and Alateen, learning what alcoholism was, and none of that saved me from my own drinking. I knew for sure, and I'm going to try not to curse, stagecoaches, big cursors, that if there was anything that was going to be true in my life, that I was never going to end up an alcoholic. I wasn't going to end up like that. I wasn't going to do that to my life and to my family. So lo and behold, age of 16, and it's important for me to say because I know you guys probably never suffer from this, but I've had ego issues my whole life, right? So from 14 to 16, I went into high school like 5 foot tall and like 180 pounds. I had the bowl cut, you know what I mean, that mothers like to ruin their children with. So that was 14, and by 16 I had grown. And for everybody here tonight, I stand at about 5'8.5" to be exact. But the difference between 5 foot and 5'8" means a lot, especially to a man. And so I leaned out quite a bit, and I was finally somebody. I went in high school with this idea that I was gonna recreate myself. Like I made friends. When I was 14, I couldn't talk to a girl, let alone a human, for more than like 5 minutes without feeling grossly uncomfortable. And I tried to pretend like I knew everything, but like I was in bad shape, right? Like bad shape as a human. At 16, I had this massive growth spurt to 5'8", and I got a haircut, and I made some friends, and I socially figured out how to talk to girls. I got a job. I was a hard worker, and I was a good student, and I somehow acquired a girlfriend, right? And like I say that because it wasn't by any like superb genius of mine that I landed this girlfriend, right? She, a pretty cute girl, and on the weekends we'd have parties at her house, and her mom was there, and everybody was allowed to drink, and her mom would drink with us, and it was like normal, and it was cool. And when I first came into AA, I started telling my story. I used to say that I was in the, hanging out with the wrong people in the wrong neighborhood, but frankly, who I was in the right neighborhood with the right people in the right places for exactly who I was at the time. So my first real effect with alcohol. People had been drinking. They're like, "Hey, Alex, you want a drink?" I said, no. Because that whole, childhood thing's fresh in my mind. And one day, the pretty little smile and the pretty little skirt comes up to me and says, "Hey, do you want to have a drink?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." You know what I mean? I had one drink as though it was soda, and I hung out with my friends. And I got on my car and I drove home. And I woke up the next day with this thought, right? That wasn't so bad. Like that was the thing that supposedly had like ruined my life. You know what I mean? And like I had a good time with friends. So that experiment went so well, next time I had 2 drinks. And that experiment went so well, next time I had 4 drinks. That experiment went so well, next time I had 8 drinks. And this kind of kept going, but I hadn't experienced this drunk thing, right? Like I had a buddy who would begin drinking, and then eventually, inevitably, he would strip down to his boxers and put on a bow tie and start stripping on my girlfriend's mom, right? And I hadn't experienced that yet. You know what I mean? Like that thing. So as I said, I was in a certain type of neighborhood, and we were at a tattoo party. And a lot of people were being tattooed by a 40-year-old crackhead. And somebody said, I bet you can't go shot for shot with so-and-so. I didn't think much of it. It was, kind of like whatever. But, then the guys start talking, you know what I mean? The girls start, kind of talking. This goes, where the ego issues kind of step in a little bit. And then so-and-so says, "I'll put up money on it." Right? And, I understood I could drink a lot more than most people, so I said, fine. I had my first real effect with alcohol. climax of the story is, down goes crackhead. You know what I mean? And I stand up from the table victorious. And, I had money in my pocket, and the girls are coming up and touching your arm, making you feel all types of masculine. Your boys are saying, good job. And the big book, it's hard, especially for people who aren't, historically inclined, to understand what, Napoleon's return from, St. Alba was. And you know what I mean? Like, I'm a little bit of a history guy. And that's that moment, right? That's Napoleon's return. That's the euphoric moment of my comeback or my introduction to greatness, is this moment where I outdrank this 40-year-old drug addict who was tattooing people. And I stood up and I felt everything that I'd ever wanted to feel in my entire life. I felt manly. I felt strong. I had made money. And I had this thing, right, that feeling that obviously Tim had felt that I had never felt. That was my buddy. That I had never felt before. So I hung out with everybody for the rest of the evening and, kind of kept drinking casually. And at some point in the party, as usual, it was my time to go home. So I said, it's time to go home. And my girlfriend's mom says, are you sure you're good to drive? And I said, yeah. I had, driven every time I drank before. No biggie. So I remember walking out the door, and graphic details are going to be left out in forums like this, but I walk out the front door, and, memory's gone, and I come to in my shower at my mom's house, and my stepdad's standing over me, and I had gotten sick everywhere, and, he asked me, what are you doing? He didn't say it like that. So I get up, and I clean myself off, and I go to bed, and I wake up the next day with a firm resolution, I'm never going to drink that brand of liquor again. And then it goes, right? Like at the beginning, I was just a weekend high school drinker. School became less important and hanging out and drinking. And I had this ego thing that I'm talking, I don't know if you guys ever experienced this, but I was in fact a 17-year-old kid who had a few friends that was able to network really well and get my hands on what I needed to get my hands on. And I was decently inclined to have women come out to parties, right? I felt I was Charlie Sheen. You know what I mean? In my head, this is my Charlie Sheen moment. You know what I mean? I got the people, I got the stuff, I got the party. People are coming out, we're having a great time. And man, did I feel good. And, only after coming to Alcoholics Anonymous did I notice my drinking change, right? And that's, for me, the importance of a written drinking history, because I couldn't see the change until I wrote it down. I told my story a long time before I wrote it down, and then it changed after I wrote it down. Something took place, right? My friends became annoying. They drank wrong. But I'm having these parties, and, at a certain time of the evening, everybody would, pass out or go home, and then all the bottles would be left at the party. And then I could stay up and drink the way I wanted to drink, which was by myself, in silence. And I had already been introduced to, Eastern styles of thinking. I was acquainted with meditation at a very young age. So sincerely, and this is where the delusion steps in. I'm sure you guys never suffered from gross delusion like I did, but this was meditation, right? It was me and the liquor bottle alone in silence, and I got to sit there. And occasionally I would come up with an excuse, I would play liquor pong by myself to practice. And that is sincerely believe that that's what I was doing. You know what I mean? I was Allen Iverson at practice. Double pun there. So yeah, I'm drinking by myself, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. And I was still having a good time. And I think in Alcoholics Anonymous, we spend too much time, and I was raised with this idea of, take the good out of your drinking. I sincerely believe that, and it was very important for me early on. But we talk a lot about what, alcohol did to us, and not a lot of time talking about what alcohol did for us. And what alcohol did for me is it gave me that thing that made me feel right in my skin. You know what I mean? I had seen professionals my entire life because, frankly, I didn't know what it was, but I never felt right in my own skin. My shoes never fit right. My face always felt wrong. You know what I mean? Who I was didn't feel okay in any moment. And alcohol solved that problem for me. I picked up one drink and I felt okay. I felt masculine. I could talk to girls. I was, attractive. My whole world changed behind one drink. And it was the greatest medication I'd ever been given in my entire life. It solved every psychological problem I'd ever come in contact with. So life's good, man. I'm just a normal high school kid, you know what I mean? And And in the midst of all this, you know, my dad's life is going up and down, up and down, up and down at the hands of alcohol. But like, I'm not like that. I'm drinking normally. I'm drinking with my friends. I'm drinking on the weekends. Like, I'm doing the high school kid thing. And then this is where I start getting stage coachy, and this is where I need to hurry it up, right? Because I'm about to draw out the next 2.5 years really, really long. I go through high school. Everything's okay. I arrive at this moment in my senior year. I was captain of, and a lot of people, I used to not say it because it was an ego issue. I was captain of the tennis team, right? And my high school, I still play. I returned to tennis after 10 years this last summer. And I returned back to tournament tennis, which is kind of a cool thing. And I'll get into that a little bit. So I was captain of the tennis team. My team had won the championship for the first time in 26 years. We were in the state playoffs. And, you know, I trained tirelessly, like 17 hours a day in the summer to make this moment happen. And we won this championship. I was captain of the team. And I get back on the bus, and it's one of the greatest, most accomplished feelings I had in my entire life. And I had a voicemail from my grandfather. I was very close to him. And it was my dad's dad, and I talked to him about twice a week, and I called him, he didn't answer, and I listened to the voicemail, and it said, "Hey, bud, it's the king. I'm calling to tell you I love you, and I'm proud of you, and I want you to always remember that." So upon arriving home, I would find out that I'm not sure if he hung up on 911 or if the call came in conjunction with that, but he would spend the next few weeks in a coma, and he would pass away the week I graduated from high school. And I was the one person he wanted to talk to in that moment, like that dying moment. And I wasn't there for him. And the reason I say that is something happened, right? And I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience. I woke up one morning, the day of my graduation, and I had this thought in my head. And it said, if you drink hard enough and you drink long enough, you don't have to feel the way you're feeling anymore. And I bought that idea. And I knew it to be true. So I arranged for myself to get a bottle. I had a high school graduation party that evening at my mom's house. It was a non-drinking event. And I had a bottle of liquor concealed in the house, and I drank the entire party into a blackout. Woke up the next day, no one knew I was drinking. And it was apparently a good time had by all. But I woke up the next day, and my grandfather was still dead, and I had all those emotions attached to it. And I was still bought on this idea that if I drank hard enough, I drank long enough, I didn't have to feel the way I was feeling anymore. And I knew that to be true, right? Because alcohol had changed everything that I thought or felt up to that point. It had given me confidence. It had given me everything good about me was given to me by alcohol. So obviously alcohol could solve this problem. It was my great solution. So I'm going to fly through. I eventually go to college. I was a seasoned drinker, shall I say, at this point. I go away to college. Backtrack. Senior year of high school, graduated, going into college. Something important happens. So Billy Joel pun aside, it's 9 o'clock on a Saturday. And I'm working a shift, and I was working like 80 hours a week, give or take, at the business I was running. I was managing a couple of stores on the Ocean City Boardwalk, and all my friends were drinking. I was getting texts that these parties were going on, and I had this idea, right? Like, I'm here working hard, and all my friends go out to have a good time because they're not like me, so I deserve to have a drink. You know, a drink at work, a Saturday night. So I have one drink at work. So that drink at work went so well, the next night at work I had 2 drinks. And then you guys already know how the story goes. So at the age of 18, before going to college, I spent a majority of that summer in and out of blackouts, drinking around the clock, running a couple stores on the Ocean City Boardwalk. Now, the blackouts were different, right? Because when I was younger, blackouts were, you know, that point in the evening where you go to sleep and then you come to or wake up the next day after having been in a blackout, right? Like, there was an end to the story and an end of the day, and then you wake up in a new day, right? By that summer, the blackouts were like 2 p.m. and coming to at 8 p.m., still standing at a register helping people or talking to one of my employees or counting money back in the safe room. And I'm coming to, like, in the middle of having lived life. And that freaked me out. But you know what? It's a thing, you know what I mean? You heard about blackouts, like, it's a thing, you know what I mean? Like, I'm drinking, this is what all high school kids do, it's fine. You know what I mean? It's like, no biggie, you know what I mean? Totally justified in it. I go away to college, and my drinking changes it becomes 7 days a week. And drinking for me, it wasn't about the party anymore. It was about drinking. It was about that thing that made me confident, that thing that gave me okayness. Like, drinking gave me that regardless of the time of day. Like, it gave it to me. So drinking made sense. You know what I mean? I didn't have anybody watching me anymore. There was no monitoring what I was doing. But drinking quickly became a problem. I'm blacking out and coming to in places I don't know with people I don't know. And I say it generally, but I think you guys get what I imply there. And as a man, I was supposed to feel macho about what was taking place there, but like I wasn't okay with it. I was waking up terrified. I didn't know where my car was, who I was with, what was going on. Last thing I remember, it was 4 p.m. and I'm leaving for, business class or whatever. And now it's 10 p.m. and I have no idea where I am. So my solution to that is it would make more sense if I went out less and drank in my dorm more. And that's what I did. The consequences of drinking, I never really got any legal trouble, but I would black out and come to, as I said, and drowning in the lake, Stockton, blackout, come to naked in the snow, blackout, come to in a lot of not comfortable situations. And the book refers to it as incomprehensible demoralization, right? I always had to brush it off, and I always was able to tell a story. I've always been a great storyteller. I could always wrap some cool thing around what was taking place. By my sophomore year, that whole thing, I'm 7 days a week locked away in a room, and I'm drinking large quantities of alcohol. And to me, I'm just getting by. I'm doing what all the college students are doing. It's the same thing everybody else is doing. And by October, November of that sophomore year, the shades are drawn every day. I'm not eating. I'm just drinking. I was like really into bodybuilding at the time, so like I literally had counted macronutrients and calculated that if I only drank rum and this much protein throughout a day, I could meet my macro needs. And I was going to the gym twice a day, using liquor as my carbohydrate intake, and then supplementing the rest of my food. And that's literally where I was at as an alcoholic, like mixing liquor and protein shakes together. And I was, I wasn't a dumb kid, you know what I mean? And I started having these real weird health issues. My skin was breaking out. I didn't feel good. I was getting sick. I stopped making the bed, and I'll leave it at that. Like, it was like a bunch of bad physical things were happening. So I went to see a doctor naturally. I was having real bad issues, and they're doing an investigation. They're finding out they become concerned that my liver and my kidneys are failing, right? I'm 19 years old. And they can't figure out why. And I say that from the podium here. I'm a straight alcoholic. There's nothing else mixed in there. So they have me in the infectious disease unit. I'm seeing a bunch of doctors. They're trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And this is the depths of the delusion. I fancy myself a pretty intelligent person generally. And I remember it was a December evening. A nurse had me on a walking IV inside my apartment so I could still do homework at college. I have a walking IV in one arm. It's freezing outside, but I'm sweating. So I have a robe and nothing else on. I'm sitting outside in the snow, smoking a cigarette, and coming back inside with my walking IV, grab the bottle of liquor. I have medical journals in front of me. I'm going to figure out what's going to kill me. Literally. I spent days like that. And I couldn't figure it out. I had no idea. So I got sick. I thought maybe... I had friends tell me I had this drinking problem, but I went to Al-Anon and Alateen. Like, I know what alcoholism looks like. Like, that's not my story. You know what I mean? Like, that's not it. I'm drinking a gallon of liquor every day, but it doesn't make me alcoholic. You know what I mean? Because I already learned it didn't matter how much you drank. You know what I mean? Alcoholic looks a certain way. I haven't done those things. I haven't blown up my whole life. You know what I mean? I just got rid of a bunch of friends, and my girlfriend wasn't that patient of a person, so our relationship was really contentious, and my parents had always been terrible to me, so, like, that relationship was foiled. Like, it wasn't alcoholism. It was like everybody else was an issue. I was all right. I don't usually tell this, but I'm going to tell it tonight. You guys have inspired me. So I remember I black out and I come to, and I had been a writer. I I black out and I come to, and I was still convincing myself that I was having a good time drinking, right? And I said that up to this point because I was trying to convince myself I was having a good time drinking. Black out and I come to, and there's a poem written on the screen in front of me. I like writing poetry, and it said, emotionless, stuck in metaphysical limbo, feels the emptiness that only souls in hell know. Praying out to God, but no angels came. This is what happens when not even God knows the pain. That's what was written in front of me as I came to, passed out at my desk. And I remember it was a very sobering moment, right? Because I was still having a good time drinking alone, locked away in my room, not eating for days. Like, I was still having a good time. And clearly whoever wrote that wasn't having a good time. I remember I stayed up that night and I cried and forced myself to drink and recited the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous to the man on the bottle. So I went to an AA meeting. I was 20 years old at this point. And when I got sober, young, especially down where I'm from, young and sober wasn't a thing, right? Like, it just wasn't. So I went to AA meetings, and there were a bunch of old people, old men and women. They were like 40 or 50. And I walked in, and I was like a pet, right? I walked in, they said, so good that you got this so young, keep coming back. And that was the interaction I had with them. And that's not on Alcoholics Anonymous, like that, and that's not on the people. That's just God giving me exactly what I needed at that moment. So I went there from drinking, and I left there to drink. And I did that a bunch of times. And every meeting I went to, they said, so good you got this so young. Because I knew the AA lingo. I sounded like I knew what I was doing. I knew how to clean up and put it all together and make you guys feel like I was doing good. And no one came up and asked, how are you doing? You know what I mean? So I had friends trying to stop me from drinking myself to death. And so it was June of 2011, and I'm going to leave myself 20 minutes for recovery, which is the longest I've ever left myself. June of 2011, I get a text. A bunch of friends are having a party up north. And so I'm going to the party. I get one buddy in the car with me, and I had the conversation I had had with my friends 1,000 times before. Listen, I'm just going to have one drink tonight. Just make sure, I don't want to overdrink or whatever thing. I don't want to embarrass myself. Just make sure I have one drink tonight, and everything will be okay. And I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know one drink was going to lead to the next one, and the rest weren't optional. Like, I didn't know that. So I had one drink, and I remember something took place in my head, and I got to get him drunk to the point that he passes out. That became my mission. Get him to pass out, and I could drink the way I want to drink. I clearly remember enough to sit on the front porch. I was drinking. I drank the night around. I did not go to sleep. I was on the front porch, and everybody woke up in the morning, and I pretended like I was waking up in the morning. I had been up drinking by myself all night, and they said, how'd you sleep? And I said, great. And got in the car to go home, and I faintly remember driving past a few cop cars, trying to find my way. It was like way not where I was from. And driving by a bunch of cop cars and eventually finding the parkway, and things get really hazy. And from this point, I could tell you what the police report says. I could tell you what my lawyer says. I could tell you what I remember, but I don't know what in there is true or not true. Point is, I go over a parkway guardrail at 75 miles an hour. I roll down an embankment, and I come to with my truck on fire with me in the cabin and my buddy hunched over. By the grace of God, he kind of wakes up, and I'm able to kick off the car door, and we pull ourselves out of the vehicle, which was just molten, melting truck. And we sit on the side of the parkway, and we watch my car burn as EMS is coming. And if you'd asked me that morning, and this is what's important, if that had anything to do with alcohol, I would have said no. Absolutely not. I'd been way more intoxicated in driving before. That was like a daily thing. That had nothing to do with drinking. It had to do with a phantom car that came up my side and spooked me into, swerving. And I go to the hospital. I'm released a few hours later. Me and my buddy, not a broken bone, not a concussion, no stitches, no nothing. I remember coming to the next day, and I had 5 minutes of willingness. And I don't want to underplay that, because I got to a point in my recovery where I said, if he really wants it, he'll get to the meeting. And at some point in time, that's true for people. But in truth, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had 5 minutes of willingness at the very beginning. And I said, I need help. My dad at that point was a 2-time veteran of a rehab. And he called the rehab, and they said, bring him in tomorrow. And, you know, my 5 minutes willingness was way gone at that point. You know what I mean? Like, so, he comes by, pick me up the next day. But I mean, worse than not wanting to go was my need to people please everybody. And I'm sure you guys don't suffer from that either. So I was like, okay, I'll go. I don't remember what I told the intake, but at the end of that, it says, listen, insurance isn't going to cover you. We can suggest IOP. Yeah, I didn't go in drunk. The hospital had detoxed me at the hospital after the accident. I'm coming apart. I'm shaking. That thing in my head's happening, and I go home, and I don't know what I'm doing. I tried Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous clearly didn't work. I was too young. I was too smart. I knew about alcoholism. AA wasn't the answer. I got a knock at the front door. It was my older stepbrother, Alex, who I hadn't seen in years, and this guy, Billy the Kid, who I knew from high school, just a couple derelicts. And they let themselves in. Billy goes for the refrigerator. He's raiding, the fridge. I think he's hungry because Billy's always hungry. He was a marathon runner. I've been on enough 12-step calls to know that they were looking for alcohol, but I thought Billy was hungry. And my brother pulls me on the back porch, and he starts that conversation that all great 12-step calls, how are you doing? And I said, good. Now, mind you, I'm detoxing. I have glass coming out of my face. I'm in sleeping pants that are torn. I was just in a car accident, and my honest answer for him is I'm doing good. Like, that's the depths of the delusion. I don't know if you guys can identify with that. I really felt like I was doing good. They didn't give me an option. It wasn't your dog. It's not your Bill and Bob story where they're sitting on the hospital bed and they're talking to that guy. They kidnapped me and brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous. They said, get in the car. And I said, okay. And they brought me a Stagecoach group. And they said, go sit down at the front near the speaker. And I said, okay. And they said, get your hand up and get honest about what's going on. I said, okay. I remember this guy, John C's anniversary, and boy, am I talking really long. It was John C's anniversary, and John and I were completely different. We had nothing in common. He was old. He was 51, and he was like old. You know what I mean? He's telling a story about biker gang and like his family and his wife and his kids and his house and all of the illegal activities he was involved in, and there was nothing the same about us. I'm a 20-year-old kid in AA. I'd never been in legal trouble. I never had a wife. I never had a kid. None of that was ever true. But he gets to the end of this 3-day run, and he talks about the decision to tie 2 belts together and hang himself off his back porch. And I knew what that felt like. And in that moment, I knew I belonged in Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew what that despair felt like. And that's despair that you can't put to words. Like, you can't record what I'm saying tonight and have a human listen to it and they understand what that feels like. But if you're in a room of AA, you probably know what that feels like. And I knew the feeling of alcohol not working anymore and not being able to fix anything. But I knew the feeling of not wanting to live but not wanting to die and being in such a place of chaos and despair that hanging yourself off a back porch sounds like a rational option. So I got my hand up and I introduced myself, and that group was always good at, they were like piranhas, man. You know what I mean? A new guy got his hand up, and then the guys at the meeting, it's like an all-out blitz. You know what I mean? They're coming for me. And, I'd been, around the rooms of AA. I know how this goes. They're going to come up, tell me a bunch of stuff. I really like not having a podium. I can move around. And I'm going to combat them with, all of my, all of my worldly knowledge. You know what I mean? I'm going to tell them about how I understand the book, and I know the steps, and I have a plan for recovery, and I got this. And Stagecoach is good like this. They said, can you not drink and come back tomorrow? I didn't have an answer for that question. I was ready to talk to you about anything else. They brought me home, and they dropped me off, and they picked me up the next day, and they brought me to 2 meetings. People of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they brought me home, and they picked me up, and the next day, it took me to 3 meetings. They brought me home, and the next day, they picked me up, took me to 4 meetings. Brought me home, dropped me off, picked me up the next morning, took me to 5 meetings. Just along for the ride at this point, you know what I mean? I'm a people pleaser. I don't want to tell these guys that are taking the time to come to my door that I don't know if I belong here. You know what I mean? They keep showing up and taking me to AA meetings, and I kind of want to, you know what I mean? I feel bad, you know what I mean? So I'll just give it a try. Yeah, I remember I had less than a week sober, and I'm going to touch on a lot of things quickly here. Stagecoach Group firmly believes that this program is really about one alcoholic helping another. So I remember I had less than a week sober. I think it was like 5 days sober, and I'm sitting there, with one of the big dogs, you know what I mean, old timers. And I'm talking to him in between the meeting. I see it's almost 5:30 meeting, and this guy, I see him, coming across the parking lot, and he's about 5'1" and like 120 pounds. He has a Batman shirt with holes in it, and I'm like, this dude's a mess. Somebody needs to help him. You know what I mean? Like, he had that look, like, just coming to his first AA meeting. I said, somebody needs help. So old timer, hey, this guy's coming across. Somebody needs to go help him. He's like, well, go talk to him. He's like, well, what am I going to say? I have, like, less than a week. So what am I going to say to him? And the old timer looked up from his seat and he said, introduce yourself and tell him how you made it through the first 5 days. And that's the first time I really understood what Alcoholics Anonymous was about. I always thought it was about the book, and I always thought it was about the 12 steps and obedience to spiritual principles. And in that moment, I'm not saying AA is not about those things before anybody gets a big book thumpy on me. As Dr. Bob's Farewell reminds us, this is about one alcoholic having a seat with another alcoholic, telling him it's going to be okay and giving him a cup of coffee. When you simmer down this to its final resolve, it's love and service. So I'm going to fast forward. I'm in AA. I was in that car accident. I now have an open court case. I basically just, all my money's gone. Open court case. My truck is obviously gone. I'm losing my license. And this is my story, and I can only share my experience. My mom wanted me to go see a professional about getting medication because I was depressed and unmanageable, and I had massive mood swings. And this was my own story, and once again, don't take this as anybody else's gospel, but I believed an old-timer in the group who said, you're going through what early recovery feels like. Like, give it a try first. So that was my story, and I wanted to do that, and that wasn't okay. So I packed a bag and I left. The doctors are talking about cutting off my left leg because I have 3 separated hematomas in the bottom of my leg, and my girlfriend pulls up in the parking lot between the 5:30 and 8 o'clock, drops off my stuff, and informs me she's been seeing somebody else. So here I am at like a month and some change, 2 months sober, and that's my life. I lost everything that the world told me was worthwhile living for. I had nothing worth anything. And I start off every share by saying, the man gave me time and hope, right? Because I sat in that meeting more free than I'd ever been in my entire life. And I lost everything worth living for. And I sat in that meeting, and I felt like maybe, just maybe, I couldn't see how, but it was going to be okay. And everybody else in the meeting told me it was going to be all right. Just one day at a time, meeting by meeting, hold on to the chair, and one day you'll get there. And I did that. Remember early on, AA had a lot of patience for me. I was that guy in the meeting. I don't know if you guys have obnoxious sharers at meeting, the new people that don't shut up, but we have them, a bunch of them down in South Jersey, and I used to be one of them. And 10 a.m., I would get my hand up, be like, Alex, I'd be like, my life's terrible. I want to kill myself. Circumstances are terrible. I don't want to be here. I'm too young. I don't feel like I'm alcoholic. 1 o'clock, I love AA. This way of life really can work for anybody. I am the hope. I got this. 5:30, I want to die. My morning sucked. I'm hungry. I have no food. This is terrible. 8 o'clock, man, I had a great conversation between the 5:30 and the 8. AA is fantastic. I'm just going to stay here one meeting at a time for the rest of my life. 10 o'clock, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I can't. This is terrible. And that was literally every day. And I don't think we talk about that a lot, like the mania of early sobriety. I don't know about you guys, but I was up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And they told me just keep holding on the chair and get my hand up, keep getting honest. And they kept giving me how it works at the beginning of the meeting. I read it 5 meetings a day at the Stagecoach, and I don't know if you guys know anything about detoxing dyslexics, but we don't read real well. And it took me 10 to 15 minutes to get through how it works, and not somebody said one thing. They sat there patiently. And then when I got done reading, you know what I mean, said thanks. And that was early recovery. I turned 21 in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I chaired the 8 o'clock meeting at the Stagecoach that night. And I stood up there, and a few of the members of the group got me presents for my 21st birthday. By that point, I made a decision to go back to college. I was given a choice that, you'd have to figure out your living arrangements at college. I didn't have a car, obviously. But thankfully, I went to school about 25 miles up the road. and I would have to figure it out. So I went to college, and I had a big book in my backpack, and I figured it out. Like, a night or two, I slept on a bench outside, metal benches outside. There were nights I slept on the tile floor of a party house that I drank in for a long time. And there are still pictures somewhere on Facebook of people having a party in a house and me in the back corner with the big book opened up, off in a bedroom somewhere. And I was the guy that worked, my whole childhood. Like, I always had money for everything. And I found myself asking people if they can buy me a sandwich with their food swipes because I hadn't eaten in 2 days. And like asking members of AA, like, hey, can you pick me up and, bring me to a meeting? I used to sit at this bus stop and members of AA would come pick me up and then they would drop me off at the bus stop and I would come back from the AA meeting and I would try to figure out where I was sleeping. And that's, that's not a little amount of time. That's 7, 8 months sober, 9 months sober, 10 months sober. 11 months sober, I got a shag carpet. My buddy said I could start sleeping on his carpet. And I don't know if you guys ever slept on tile and moved up to a shag carpet, but like, whoo, it's like the penthouse, at the Ritz. I had a little sweatshirt, shag carpet, I was sleeping there. I had it good, Like, I was filled. I can't explain it, right? I don't know. For me, my story had to be that if I was ever to learn gratitude. Because I didn't think I was a spoiled child, but in fact, I was a spoiled child. You know what I mean? I'm American, born in the 21st century. Like, I didn't know how bad it could be. You know what I mean? Like, and in truth, my suffering is nothing compared to most of the world. On any given day, like being here, hanging out with you guys is way better than most of the world has it. So I keep going to AA. I celebrate 1 year sober, and I got 10 minutes left. So watch me fit in the next 7.5 years. It's like a year a minute. I get 1 year sober. I graduate college. I have a really good relationship with my first sponsor. I eventually moved into his house. His house was empty. It was just him. He moves me in. I get one of the bedrooms, and we had 2 bedrooms for alcoholics. We used to, like, before the rehabs were like a big thing, you know what I mean? Like, he was raised old AA style, so, you take an AA who's detoxing and bring him to the house. You know what I mean? Detox him at the house. And, we'd be up in the middle of the night, and he used to have the guys who were detoxing roll of cigarettes for him in the middle of the night, you know what I mean, in between work. So, some nights he would come out and, like, he would have the World War II channel on with the artillery guns going, and he would have his, tobacco machine cranking out cigarettes. And it was like 1 a.m. and we'd go out and we'd go to the gym twice a day. And like, I've learned something sober, and I'm going to leave it at this. There are moments that I didn't know were the greatest moments of my life, and they were right in front of me. And I lived long enough to look back and wish I had those moments back. I'll just say my first sponsor made a left turn where he taught me to always make a right turn. Our relationship fell apart, and he wasn't around anymore. I was in the middle of a 4-step, my first 4-step. And I didn't have a sponsor, and I was lost. My whole identity was everything he had taught me. He actually attended my college graduation in lieu of family. And he made a left turn. And I couldn't follow him where he was going. And it wasn't like a quick exit, it was a slow exit. So I struggled with my identity in AA for a while, and I got really into the book and the steps, and I was good at order, and I got on the big book high horse. I don't know if you guys know people like that, where, the big book is the immutable law of the universe. It was God's gift to alcoholics, and nothing in there is ever wrong, and everything's ever right, and every answer in the book, really applies to every part of life. And I'm not saying that's not true, so if you're a big book person, don't attack me after the meeting, because I've been there. I got to a point where I was speaking in front of conventions, in front of 1,000-plus people. I spoke all over, the Northeast. I ran conventions on 6-hour speaking slots, walked through the big book. I had done that a few times all over the place. Like, I'm not acquainted with the literature. Believe me, I was there. But I found myself in AA getting very, very lonely. And I didn't know this, but I was using the big book as a weapon. I was judging everybody as to how their program was wrong and how I was doing it right. And, like, I didn't want that. And one day I found myself in a meeting, and I'd been around for years, and I remember people would kind of walk by me and not say anything. I became more lonely than I was as a newcomer. And I had to take a hard look at myself. And somebody pointed me, one night I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm sitting across from Dr. Bob's farewell, and I read it, and I really let it sink in. That I was using the big book as a weapon and not a tool. That all this, when you simmer it down, is love and service. And I got away from that. And life has a really good way of teaching me all of the lessons I need to learn. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Job from the Bible. I constantly feel like every time I make a positive move, life smacks me back down again. I'll get into that a little bit. I really got my life together. I was living out on my own. I graduated college. I was the prince of a decent-sized healthcare company. Some legislation got passed that was pretty popular, and essentially my entire industry got wiped out. And in a matter of 2 years, I went from prince of a healthcare company to family in bankruptcy, and my mom's house is being foreclosed on. I spent my whole life prepared to be this thing, right? My whole life had been laid out in front of me. I was a good AA boy. I got A's on all my AA report cards. I did good works. Graduated college. I had this whole future lined up in front of me about what I was going to do, and almost overnight it was taken. It was gone. Before that, I ran into a circumstance. I had a very casual relationship with an ex-girlfriend. I'll leave it at that. In the course of that casual relationship, one day she calls me and says, I'm pregnant with a child. I don't want to have an abortion, but I know you don't want a kid, so I'm going to kill myself. And then she goes missing from the police. I can't find her. Now, see, I had done everything right in AA for so long. You know what I mean? Why does this happen to me? And, I don't know if you guys are that acquainted with the literature, but there's no chapter in the big book to the guy whose ex-girlfriend's pregnant and trying to kill herself and missing from the police. I didn't find that chapter in the big book. I found the wisdom in the members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I say that to say that the fellowship's important. Because at the beginning, it was about one alcoholic's experience helping me. I didn't get it from a book. I couldn't read. Really, when I got here, I knew how to read. I wasn't illiterate, but I couldn't read. I couldn't retain information. It was the alcoholic stories who helped me, and at that moment, when I'm crushed, I only knew how to do one thing, which was to go to a meeting, and this is the one thing I've done in AA right the entire time I've been here, is regardless of what's going on, I find a way to get to a meeting, and I get my hand up, and I talk about what's going on honestly. And for anybody that's new, it gets harder the longer you stay sober. So if you haven't figured out how to get your hand up and share yet, it's only going to get harder. So I recommend doing it now. Because it's not easy sitting in a meeting and being the guy that was holier than thou last week and saying, my ex-girlfriend's missing and she's going to kill herself and I don't know what to do with my life. And that's a thought of a drink if I've never heard one before. Might not be a thought of a drink, but it's a thought of a drink. Or that my family's company is tired going, I don't know what my identity is or what my future looks like. Getting into a meeting and getting your hand up and getting honest about that is what saved my life. That's one of the things that I held on to. 5.5 years sober, I tore my Achilles tendon playing a game of football. It actually shredded. I went to the doctors. The doctors are talking to me. They're talking about the possibility of having to cut my leg off. If I come to, I might never walk again. If I do walk again, I'm going to walk with a limp. You don't know how important walking is until you're faced with the idea that you're never going to walk again. I took walking for granted. So I went through that surgery. I asked them for none of the stuff that would... I was more afraid of Mr. Hyde than I was of the potentiality of not walking again. So I asked them to don't give me any of the stuff that they want to give you, and they tell you if you don't take it, you might never walk again. I said, try me. You know what I mean? I've been through worse. And this is kind of, I think, the spirit of where I want to round out at. We don't know the impact we have on other people, especially in AA. You don't know how a small conversation outside of a meeting can change somebody's life. We don't see the ripples that we of Alcoholics Anonymous have the ability to share with one another, which is really important. You don't know what moment is somebody's biggest moment. You don't know what moment sitting on the couch with your first sponsor helping them roll cigarettes is going to be the moment you want back forever. You don't know what all that time or the driving means to people. When I got sober and the guys took me to meetings and they gave me food and stuff, they said, When the time comes, do unto others as it was freely done to you. That's how I was raised in AA, and I never got to pay those guys back directly, but I was able to give what they gave me to as many people as possible. So I tear my Achilles tendon. I'm on a couch. I had to go back to my mom's house. We didn't have a great relationship at this point. I tore my Achilles tendon and repaired my relationship with my mom, ironically. So I'm laying on her couch the next day, and it's a type of pain I can't describe physically. You know what I mean? Like set your leg on fire with kerosene and sit still for a while, you know, with the inability to move it. And I can't quote the exact number. Somewhere between 45 and 55 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to my mother's house to bring me a meeting at 8 o'clock that next night from all over the state. Some drove 2.5 hours. And I sat there on the couch and I was brought to the point of tears. Like, I was the guy that never needed help. I was the guy that knew everything. I was the guy that was always there to help everybody else. I didn't need help in life. I became egotistical, and there's nothing more humbling than a girlfriend that you were going to break up with having to shower you because you can't shower yourself. Or members of AA bringing you gifts and bringing a meeting to your home. And then, like, in that moment, and that was years ago now, I got like less than a minute. You understand exactly what that 5-minute conversation outside the meeting meant to somebody, or that one ride to a meeting. You don't understand how important those little things are until you're the person who's utterly destitute and people show up for you. You don't understand how important that is, or the impact Alcoholics Anonymous can have on a human life. So it's been 2.5 years since, and I'll wrap up with this because I'm at my final moment. I returned to playing tennis. 3 hours worth of running. The Achilles tendon's completely healed. I have a new career and a new job. I own a business. And most importantly, like, I'm financially secure, and all the promises became true for me again. I can obviously walk. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to drive an hour and a half just to speak to a few people or 100 people at a meeting. Because this might be the moment that I always wanted back, which I think was the point of what I wanted to share tonight. Exactly where your 2 feet are might be the moment that you wish you could have back someday. So hang on to it. Because today I have everything I ever needed. I have a life beyond my wildest dreams, and it doesn't mean that I got everything I wanted. But AA has given me a life that, like, is well beyond anything. And, like, I came into AA and the sound in my head wouldn't stop and the voices wouldn't stop going, and it was on and on throughout the day, and I couldn't even listen to the speaker. And I would try to hook in because I know the thing they're sharing might be the thing that saves my life, and I can't talk and thing in my head, and, you know, you're good looking, you're not good looking, you're ugly, and everything's going 1,000 miles a minute. And today I get in my truck and I don't put on music, and I sit there in silence, and it's the most peaceful moment of my day. There's not another voice. There's not even my own voice. I can sit in total silence. And that's something that Alcoholics Anonymous gave me unintentionally, and they didn't promise it to me. But it's the greatest asset I have today. That no matter where I stand at any moment, I'm prepared to face judgment, whatever that means. Because this moment's the most precious thing I have, and that we have. So, with that, I want to thank all you guys for coming out. That's all I have.